Okay, so we'll continue because we're a bit behind the schedule. So in the second part I will talk about capture mark-recapture models. I will try not to go too much into details, but more to give you an overview of what can we do in terms of modeling or part of with all the photo identification data. Okay, so first to talk to you about the origin of capture mark-recapture, so that you understand a little bit better the terminology that is used. So the origin is from setting traps to catch rabbits, so that would be a capture. Then you put an artificial mark on them, so that would be a mark. And then you release them, and then sometime later you go again, put new traps to capture new individuals and recapture some previously marked individuals, so that would be the recapture of the animal. So with Photo ID, of course, we've said before, we only take pictures of natural marks, so there's no capture, there's no artificial marks that are put on them. And then you take picture later of new and some previously identified individuals. You can also apply it with genetics through biopsy samples, so you can also analyze a biopsy sample using genetic markers with enough definition to distinguish between individuals, and you can also run mark-recapture models from genetic data. So once we've created our catalog, we've analyzed our pictures, what we're going to do is to create an encounter history for each individual. So it's very basic. You have 1, you've seen the animal, and 0, you have not seen the animal. Okay, so if you have 3 sampling sessions, for example, you can have individuals that you have seen in all 3, some that you have seen in the first, not in the second, but again in the third one, or others that you have seen in the first 2 and not in the third one. So what the capture mark-recapture model are using is from this data is to estimate parameters based on the encounter history data through the capture probability. Okay, so the capture probability, it will know here with this 0 between an individual seen, not seen, and then seen again, that you did not see it, but it was alive. So you know it should have been there, but you didn't see it. So this is how you can come up with some statistics and understand the demographic parameters. So you can use photo identification to estimate a lot of different parameters. This is the main ones that have been used with cetaceans, so to estimate population size, survival rates, population growth rate, birth rates, residence pattern, places of migration, social structure, even population structure. And if you have long-term monitoring plans, then you can detect changes in all of these parameters. Okay, so now when I was saying at the beginning that it's a powerful tool, you can understand that just taking pictures of dorsal fins, then you can come up with all this type of information. So I've talked before about sampling occasion. So the definition of this sampling occasion depends on the question that is asked. So if you're only interested in annual survival rate, then you just want to know if the individual is alive within a year. So you just need 1 picture of that individual, and that's enough. If you want to do population estimates within that same year, then you need to recapture within that year the same individual. So then you need enough effort to have recitings of those individuals. If you want to look at social structure, then you need a lot of recitings of individuals seen together over the long term to understand how each individual relates to the others. So there's a minimum data requirement. So the P, which is our capture probability, has to be at least 10%. So that means that at least 10% of the individuals that you have cited in one occasion has to be recited in the next occasion. A lot of the time this is actually difficult in citation, and especially in areas where you have a lot of movements of individuals going through your area. But sometimes it can be very easy. So you have some example in the Sado in Portugal, for example, where they just live inside an estuary, and so you see the same individuals over and over again, and it's a very small population. But anyways, it requires a targeted effort, so that means that many days at sea in an area where you're most likely to find the species. And in many places, the first year of data cannot be used, or they are discarded from mark-recapture models, mainly because you are trying to know what is there. Sometimes the people are not trained well enough, or the material you use is not good enough, and this is very typical in a lot of the studies, to see the first years of the study that are just discarded from the models. Okay, so here's an example that we have done for the project Mystic Seas 2, which is a step-by-step monitoring to try to understand and come up with a strong and easily replicable ways of doing these occasions. So first, during the first years, there were surveys to establish the distribution and encounter rate, and to collect the first photo identification data of some of the key species around here. And then from there you can define first your study area, so around the places where you see most of the animals. And you can design transects within those areas that you will replicate, and this will form, one transect can form your occasion. Okay, so Ruth will talk about it in distance, but you can use that program that will cover the area homogeneously. Just doing that is quite easy in the program. You also need to know the p-value, so the reciting probability. So to have some first data will give you some idea of if you're seeing most of the time the same individuals or not, and then you need to have a lot more effort. So to know which effort you need, you can do power analysis that will tell you the minimum effort that you will need to actually reach that p-value, and then you can finally design your survey accordingly to that information. So with any statistical models, there are basic assumptions that needs to be met, otherwise you just cannot believe any of the results from that model. So with mark-recapture models, the marks have to be unique, so you know that you won't mismatch two individuals because they have the same marks. So a lot of the time we're using only well-marked individuals that will have various marks, and that will make them truly unique to other ones. The marks are not lost, so you should keep track of mark changes. So have you seen in the example before of the pilot whale, you've seen that new marks can appear, but you still have the old ones to actually identify that individual. And a lot of the time it actually takes years and years for new marks to appear. And so it is, photo identification is still a good tool to use. And the marks are correctly recorded and reported. So you only use, most of the time, high quality pictures. So a high quality picture, if we're talking about the dorsal fin, it should be perpendicular, well lit, the fin is fully out of the water, and you have a perfect focus. Okay, so to have this from a moving boat of an animal that is moving in difficult conditions and everything is not always that simple. Okay, and it's a good thing to have two different pictures checking the recaptures, so that you also make sure that the work is well done. So these are just a few examples of different quality types that goes from excellent to very poor. So this is in focus, not completely out of the water, not very well lit, and different marking levels that you can use of very distinctive, all the way to non-distinctive. So there's no nicks on the edge here. There is a scar, but the scars can disappear sometimes even over a few weeks, and in other times they can stay for the entire life of the individuals. Okay, so these are, they can be used in the short term, but usually not on the long term. So for the population estimates, we have two different types of models. So the first one is closed population models. So that means that it's closed to immigration, births and deaths. So there are software that can tell you from the data if this is actually happening, or you can also use a discovery curve. So there you just have the cumulative number of individuals identified against the cumulative number of captures. Okay, so once you actually reach a plateau, then you're not finding new individuals in your population, and this is when you know that you've identified most of your animals. Of course, on the very long term, it will always keep on increasing because you always have, hopefully, new individuals that come into your population. Then you can also work with open population models, but these are very difficult to model, and they can be very sensitive to changing tiny parameters, and then you go from having an estimate of 300 to 3,000 individuals, and so it's more difficult to know. Well, you have to be very cautious when you use those models. Okay, so with cetaceans, a lot of the time you can use closed population because you use a short term, so you're very unlikely to have births or deaths happening. And if you know well enough the population to understand immigration and emigration within that time frame as well. Another problem is an individual heterogeneity of capture. So this is very typical in cetaceans. What it means is some individuals are more likely to be observed than others. And it's very difficult to model. You know it's present in your data sets that if you take that parameter into account when you are doing the model, then you will have higher estimate than if you don't take it into account. So it's always good to investigate when you have enough data if this is something that is a problem in your data set. So it can be minimized by equal probability of capture. Okay, so this is when we're coming back to what you are doing in the field. So taking pictures of all individuals, so irrespective of the level of marking, so you don't have individuals that you focus on because, oh, this one is really well marked, so I just want this one, but then you're forgetting the other individuals. So this is when you are creating heterogeneity, when you're trying to only get really well marked individuals, when you should take all of them. And to cover the spatial distribution equally. So you have some individuals that may use some of your study area more than other areas. Then if you cover all of the area, then you can work out with that. And you can also use only the well-marked individuals in the analysis. So this is in the analysis, that's not from the field. So that will usually limits the data set to only adults because most cetaceans get new marks over time, so the very young individuals tend not to have any marks, and then as they grow older they will get new ones. And with capture mark-recapture you also have to understand that you only estimate parameters of marked individuals in your population. Okay, so with the population estimate, then you can use correction factor to integrate all the other individuals that you photographed but that you're not using in the analysis. So the correction factor to have your total population size, you can base your correction factor on the group size that can be estimated in the field, and then you know how many individuals you identified from that group and how many there were in total. And so that gives you a percentage of the marked individuals in your population. Or you can also base it on the number of photographs that you have of marked and unmarked individuals that you have analyzed. Okay, so this is why it's also very important to take pictures of all the individuals, no matter how the marking level is, because otherwise then you cannot apply this type of correction factor afterwards. So another important parameters is the annual apparent survival rate. Okay, so this is an important word because in the survival rate you have two components. You have one is mortality, so the individual is not surviving from one year to the next, but you can also have emigration from your area. Permanent immigration. That's an individual that was here and then it left forever, but you don't know if it's still alive or not. Okay, so this is why it's an apparent survival rate. So it's called the Cormac-Jolly-Seba model. It's actually 3 guys that came at the same time with the same model, and they each published the model on their own, and then afterwards people said, okay, you did the same thing, so we'll call it with all of you. So there are goodness of fit tests. So this is to know how your data set can be well analyzed within the model. So there you are looking for problems of transience, so these individuals that have been seen only once in your data set, so they can create problems to estimate well the survival rate. And trap dependence. Okay, so this is when we go back to our little bunnies from the start. So you can have trap happy bunny and trap shy bunny. So the trap happy is the one that will understand there was bait in the cage, so this is why it's going back to the cage. And every time it will see a cage, it say, oh, there's food, so it will run to it and then get trapped over and over and over again. And then you have the trap shy, which is the opposite, which is the bunny that will say, ooh, I went into a cage, I was terrified, I'm not ever stepping into that cage. Okay, so how does that relate with cetacean, you will say? Well, you don't bait them or do anything like that. But you can also have individuals that you see a lot more than other, and for example, this will happen if you have very core resident individual, then you will have problems of trap happy individuals. So these are individuals that you will see more over and over and over, and then you have trap shy that can be individuals that are spending less time in your study area, and you will see less than the other ones. Okay, another important thing is to have short sampling time with a long interval between your sampling time. Okay, so usually an interval between sampling should be at least 3 times longer than the sampling period. So if you want to look at annual survival rate, maybe you should focus during 3 months taking pictures and then leave 9 months where you don't use the data or you don't go out at sea, and then the next year you again sample for 3 months. Okay, so this is to give time for animals to actually die from one year to the next, or to emigrate from your areas. So another interesting parameters is the population growth rate. So if we just say that, we understand that it's just a population that is getting more individuals or less individuals. But what is interested with those models is that it doesn't just look at the number of individuals, it actually look at the recruitment, so how many new individuals came into your population, and it will subtract the apparent survival from those new individuals, so you kind of have this balance between the two. So you can either have no growth rate, so you have the same number of recruitment as the apparent survival, or you can have a positive growth rate where you have more recruitment than survival. So with this interesting work on the humpback whales, how did they come back from whaling time? And they actually had a growth rate of 12% over many years, which was way above what people believed that what was biologically possible, where the limit was set around 3 or 4%. But when they are recovering from this type of things, then they can go well beyond. Okay, then we go a bit deeper, and we can look at the robust design. So what the robust design is basically mixing population estimates and apparent survival rate. So within 1 year, you will have a lot of secondary samples. So you will say this is a close time where you can estimate your population, and you have your primary sample, which is a year, and so from 1 year to the next, you can estimate survival rate because this is a time where you have an open population. Okay, so within those 3 months, you can have your sampling occasions that are divided inside that year, and then you can look at that from 1 year to the next. So these models are very robust to heterogeneity problem, and they can also estimate temporary emigration. So temporary immigration would be an individual that was seen the first year, wasn't seen the second year because it went out, and then is coming back on the third year. Okay, so this is back to our 101. So we know it was alive, but it was not seen. So it went out and then came back. Okay, so these are interesting things to understand dynamics of how individuals are using your area. But this type of models are data greedy, so you need to have a lot of data to actually make them run with a lot of recyclings. Then we have multi-site models. So these can estimate parameters between different sampling areas. Okay, so this will mainly look at the probability of transition. So if you have three area A, B, and C, then you can have movements between the different areas, and then so the probability of going from one area to another, or to actually stay within your area. So this can be interesting to look at residency patterns and movements between islands. And then from those models, you can have multi-state models, where a state can be the age class, for example, or can be a reproduction status of the animals. So here's an example of just having calf, juveniles, and adults, where you can have transition from calf to juvenile or juvenile to adults. And you will know also from these transition probabilities for how long is your animals being a juvenile, or for how long does it take for them to become an adult. So within all of those models, you can also include individual covariates. So one of the main things of those covariates is that they have to stay equal along the survey period. So you have to know that they're not really changing, and this is important. But still, you can include, for example, size or contaminant level if you expect it not to be too different along your survey period, and then you can look at how it influences survival rate, for example. You can also have group covariates, so to look at survival rate differences between sex, so if males or females tend to have different survival rates. So most of the time females tend to live longer, so to have higher survival rate. Or by social groups, so this can be also interesting to look at different social groups, how will they survive over time, and if there's differences between them. And then you can also input external covariates. So for example, maritime traffic or temperature, etc., that can also vary through time, and then can also affect the survival of your individuals. Other type of models are birth and fecundity rates. So these are models that are based on the probability of a female giving birth, that will be conditional on previous births. So basically you get an interbirth interval, and you can estimate those for all your different females based on females that you have good information, and that information can be used to estimate if another female is supposed to have a baby but she doesn't, and so these can be quite interesting to see at your population levels. But for those models you need at least 10 years of data, so you need to already have quite a long monitoring program, and you need also very high probability of capture, so more than 30% of your females that will be seen over and over again. So there are other type of models. So there are multi-event models where you can have uncertainty. So for example, if you believe that an individual is reproductive, but you are not completely sure, so that these are the type of things that you can model. You also have Bayesian models. I won't go into details, but basically these are models where you can put prior knowledge on certain parameters that you can acquire in other ways, and it will also be very powerful to smooth estimates of years where you have little data. Okay, so this can be interested in areas where you have some years where you have surveys, and then others you don't have surveys but still have few data that can be available. Then the social structure. So the social structure is basically estimated from the association between pairs of individuals over time. So this allows you to understand the social system. So there are basically two types. So you can have constant companions, or so individuals that tend to stay together the entire life, or at least during the study period, and casual acquaintances. So these can be individuals that will stay together for some time and then they will separate and not come back together. And so from those data you can then build social networks, and so you can include network metrics, so to see the strength and the importance of each individual within the social structure, and then understand how each individual is relating to the other. And see, here's an example of pilot whales here in Madeira, where you have the core resident individuals that are zoomed in here, and then you have all other transients and visitors that tend not to mix themselves with the other ones. So you can also look at residence patterns, so investigate the levels of site fidelity, so knowing if you're seeing the same individuals over and over again, or if you just see them once and then so it's just more of a passage area. But for that you need year-round surveys, so it's not always feasible, or it can be very costly. And you need various years to actually determine an individual residency. So maybe it was there for 1 year, but then it went away for the rest of its life and was never seen there again. And so there is now a standardized site fidelity index that is being developed to have something more comparable between areas. Okay, again, this is an example of short fin pilot whales. Places of migration, so there were catalogs that were done in the Azores, in Madeira, and the Canaries, and they've looked at how individuals were seen in different places. So just having a catalog and comparing between areas, and then you can see that we had some movements of individuals from Madeira to the Azores and from Madeira to the Canaries. There wasn't any between the Canaries and the Azores. So this can also inform you a little bit more on the population structure as well. Okay, just to go through rapidly the different softwares. So if you're interested into doing that, there's Mark. So there you can estimate most of the demographic parameters. It's regularly updated with new models and everything. And if you want to get into capture mark-recapture model, then read the Mark book. There's everything there. It's over 1,000 pages now, but it has a very clear and simple introduction to the basic concepts. And so then there are other types of models that have been developed in France, especially for multi-state and multi-event models. Then you have UCare for goodness of test. Closed test to test population closure, and SOCPROG that is mainly used for the social structure analysis. Okay, and thank you for your attention.